The Young and the Restless spoilers. After Chance's unexpected death, Genoa City found itself plunging into a void that no one had foreseen but everyone had feared. For years, Chance Chancellor had not only been a beloved member of the community, but also a quiet, resolute protector of order. His badge carried more than authority, it carried the weight of trust in a town where trust was a rare and precious currency. But with his sudden passing, everything shifted. There was no anchor to tether the city's sense of security anymore. An unspoken understanding dissolved into tension. Lawlessness crept through the shadows like a whisper on the wind. For the first time in years, the streets of Genoa City felt vulnerable, like something vital had been severed beneath the surface. As news of Chance's death spread, questions began to surface. Too many loose ends, too many inconsistencies. Whispers of a cover-up. Rumors of a deeper conspiracy. And at the center of it all, the shadowy figure of Damien, a name that surfaced with chilling frequency in hushed conversations but with no clarity about who he truly was or what his role had been. Damien had allegedly been linked to a secretive chain of criminal activities that stretched from one coast to another, and now his name was being spoken in the same breath as Chance's demise. Some believed Damien had orchestrated Chance's downfall. Others speculated that both men were victims of a larger force still lurking in the darkness. But there were no answers, and worse, there was no one left to ask the right questions. In the wake of Chance's absence, the town began to fracture. Alliances that had once held firm began to splinter. Without a dependable presence in law enforcement, vigilantism and suspicion grew rampant. Nick Newman tried to step up quietly behind the scenes, working favors and leveraging influence, but even he couldn't fill the gap that Chance had left. The GCPD seemed rudderless, reduced to responding to petty crimes while the bigger threats loomed unchecked. The citizens cried out, not just for justice, but for leadership, for a symbol that someone, somewhere, still had control. Online forums, fan groups, and city petitions began to chant the same name: bring back a cop who had once stood tall. Someone with a moral compass. Someone who wasn't afraid of darkness because he had lived through it. Bring back Rey Rosales. Many had nearly forgotten him. Or perhaps they had tried to. His exit had been abrupt, a death clouded in ambiguity. Rey had supposedly died during a tragic car accident, his body never found, his fate left hanging in the kind of eerie vagueness that soap operas had perfected over decades. The moment had faded from public memory like a distant nightmare. Sharon had mourned, but quickly moved on. The Rosales family scattered to different corners of the narrative. And just like that, Rey Rosales was erased. Another casualty of Genoa City's ever-turning wheel of heartbreak and betrayal. But what viewers didn't know, what the characters couldn't imagine, was that Rey never truly died. The accident was real, but so was the cover-up. Someone had wanted him gone. Someone had manipulated the wreckage, altered records, paid off witnesses. Rey, clinging to life, had been spirited away to a remote medical facility under a false identity. He spent months between life and death, caught in a fog of pain and fractured memories. When he finally awoke, the only thing he could cling to was the gnawing sense that his supposed accident hadn't been an accident at all. As Rey recovered, the betrayal began to calcify into purpose. He revisited every detail, every odd interaction before the crash, every inexplicable decision from those he trusted. There were names he didn't forget. People who had walked away from him the moment things got tough. And at the top of that list was Sharon. A woman he had loved unconditionally, but who had never fully let go of her past. Sharon had made him believe that he could be her future, only to turn cold and distant the moment old flames reignited. Nick. Adam. Anyone but Rey. And as he lay broken in a hospital bed far from Genoa City, Rey came to a painful realization: no one was coming to find him because no one truly wanted him back. He had been erased because he was inconvenient. Because he had asked the wrong questions. Because his presence reminded others of their guilt. And in that silence, Rey began to rebuild, not just his body, but his mission. He no longer sought justice for himself. He wanted the truth. About Chance. About Damien. About the network that seemed to have reached into both their lives and severed them from everything they once stood for. Rey had once believed in rules, in process, in honor. But now, freed from the shackles of his badge and the expectations of love, he was more dangerous than ever. He had nothing to lose, and for a man like Rey Rosales, that made him unstoppable. His return to Genoa City was anything but grand. He didn't announce himself. He didn't ask for help. Instead, he moved in the shadows, gathering evidence, watching old enemies, reconnecting with quiet allies who still owed him favors. Abby was shocked when she spotted a man resembling Rey at the Chancellor Park in the dead of night, but when she turned to look again, he had vanished. Kevin Fisher, now deeply embedded in GCPD's cybercrimes unit, received a mysterious encrypted email pointing him toward tampered surveillance footage on the night of Chance's death. Rey was playing the long game, and every move was precise, calculated, and untraceable. As Rey began to untangle the threads, one truth emerged: Chance's death was not only a murder, it was a message. And it had something to do with a larger web of corruption that may have reached the upper echelons of Genoa City's business elite. Perhaps even inside Newman Enterprises. Rey found himself drawn once again into the treacherous world he had once walked away from, only now he was no longer bound by protocols or departmental red tape. He could infiltrate, interrogate, disappear. He didn't need a badge anymore. He was justice incarnate. But as Rey dug deeper, he also found himself wrestling with his past. Seeing Sharon from a distance reopened wounds he thought had healed. She looked content, perhaps even happy. But Rey saw what others didn't: the flicker of regret in her eyes when she looked at old photos, the way she avoided driving down certain streets, the moments of pause in her laughter. She had moved on, yes, but not without consequence. She was haunted too. And that meant something. But Rey wasn't back for love. He had shed that skin. What remained was colder, more focused, more resolute. He didn't need forgiveness, and he wasn't offering any. The case led him to Damien's last known associate. A former intelligence officer turned mercenary named Vargo, who had embedded himself deep within the industrial security world of Genoa City. Vargo had cleaned up messes for the rich and powerful. He had access, resources, and more importantly, secrets. Rey tracked him like a ghost, observing his routines, listening to coded calls, following paperless money trails. The confrontation, when it finally came, was quiet. No explosions. No shootouts. Just two men in a forgotten parking garage, and one demand: tell me who killed Chance. Vargo, cornered and stripped of options, told Rey everything. The death of Chance Chancellor wasn't about revenge or a vendetta. It was a planned removal, an elimination of a threat to a global syndicate that had quietly infiltrated American corporate structures. Damien had been their enforcer, but Chance had gotten too close. When Damien started to second-guess the operation, they killed him too. The syndicate feared exposure, and Chance had been their only real obstacle. Now Rey had a name. A target. A direction. And Genoa City had a new shadow in its midst, one that walked silently, judged fiercely, and answered to no one. While the world believed he had died, Rey Rosales was reborn. Not as a cop. Not as a lover. But as the reckoning that was long overdue. Rey's silent return to Genoa City didn't just signal a shift in the balance of power, it marked the beginning of an emotional reckoning that no one had anticipated, least of all those who had spent years burying the truth beneath layers of deception. Victor Newman, the patriarch of one of the most powerful families in the city, had weathered storms, confronted enemies, and even stared down death itself more than once. But when he received the first whisper that Rey Rosales was not only alive but back in town with a singular purpose, to uncover the truth about Chance's death, his reaction wasn't fear. It was relief. In Rey, Victor saw something rare, a man of unwavering moral clarity, someone who had nothing left to prove and therefore had everything to gain. The streets had grown volatile, alliances unstable, loyalties eroded by ambition and personal vendettas. But now, someone with resolve had returned, someone who would not be bought, who would not be silenced. And that alone gave Victor a reason to believe that Genoa City still had a fighting chance to recover its soul. But not everyone welcomed Rey's return with such quiet confidence. Across town, behind a mask of carefully curated charm and corporate polish, Kane Ashby was unraveling. He had built his life on foundations that looked respectable from the outside: family man, business operator, one-time husband of Lily Winters. But behind that image was a tangle of deceit that had never fully come to light. He had always been a man caught between redemption and regression, walking a tightrope between who he wanted to be and who he feared he already was. And now, with Rey back in town, those ghosts stirred with a vengeance. Kane had managed to keep most of his sins tucked safely in the shadows. He'd buried them beneath paperwork, bank accounts, offshore connections, and buried friendships. But now, a man like Rey, a man with ties to the late Chancellor, was looking for answers. And if he started digging, it was only a matter of time before the past clawed its way to the surface. Rey and Chance had not merely been colleagues. They had shared a deep bond forged in loyalty and duty, brothers not by blood but by the badge and the risks they had taken together. Rey's rage simmered beneath a cool exterior. He walked through Genoa City with a stillness that felt like the calm before a storm. His eyes no longer searched for comfort or reconciliation. They searched for cracks, inconsistencies, the subtle tells of guilt worn too long. When he learned that Chance had died under mysterious circumstances linked to a man like Damien, a ghostly figure with deep criminal roots, Rey's grief fused with fury. This wasn't an ordinary case. This was personal. And anyone connected to Damien's network was now under silent investigation. Kane knew this. And he felt the walls begin to close in. Years ago, Kane had made choices, ones that seemed justifiable at the time, desperate even. But desperation had turned into opportunism, and one shady transaction had bled into another. He had crossed paths with Damien long before anyone knew that name meant danger. Business ventures, mutual contacts, favors exchanged, money laundered through false fronts. Kane had convinced himself he was just surviving, just playing the same game everyone else in Genoa City played, only more discreetly. But unlike the Newmans or the Abbotts, Kane had no legacy to protect him, no empire to shield him from exposure. He had flown under the radar for years, his secrets locked in encrypted servers and silent accomplices. But Rey was the kind of man who didn't need digital footprints. He read people. He observed patterns. And Kane had started to sweat. It began with a single phone call. A private investigator Kane had hired years ago suddenly disappeared. His office raided. No trace of the files Kane had paid to keep hidden. Then a second warning. A financial shell company that had shielded one of Kane's more questionable transactions was flagged in an anonymous leak. It was subtle, nothing the authorities would immediately pounce on. But Kane knew exactly what it meant. Rey was here. Rey was watching. And Rey was not going to stop until he unearthed everything. Kane tried to steady himself. He doubled down on his charm offensive, showing up at the GCAC with a bright smile, shaking hands, making small talk with key players like Devin and Nate, pretending to be involved in philanthropic causes. But beneath that polished veneer, paranoia bloomed like a cancer. He started snapping at assistants. He avoided calls from old associates. His sleep grew restless, peppered with memories of those late-night deals, the coded messages, the time he almost pulled out but didn't because the payout was too big to resist. He knew it would catch up with him one day, but he had hoped that day would never come. Then Rey showed up at society. It wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices, no sudden confrontation. Just Rey walking in, dressed in black, eyes sharp, posture calm. He made no effort to hide himself. He sat at a corner booth, ordered coffee, and said nothing. But Kane saw him. And in that moment, everything cracked. He made eye contact with Rey, and Rey didn't blink. Didn't nod. Didn't acknowledge him at all. Because Rey didn't need to. His presence was enough. The message was clear: I know who you are. I know what you did. And I'm coming for the truth. Kane staggered out before finishing his drink. Those watching him noticed the sudden tremor in his hand, the sweat at his brow. He went home and tore apart his office, looking for files, backup drives, anything that could be used against him. But it was too late. Rey wasn't looking for documents. He was following behavior. He was watching how Kane unraveled under pressure. Every move Kane made now was a clue, a step closer to confession. The walls were closing in, not because Rey was chasing him, but because Kane was already running. Rey, for his part, wasn't distracted by the theater. He had a list. And Kane wasn't the only name on it. But he was one of the few who had a choice left: come clean, or be exposed when the inevitable came crashing down. And Kane knew one thing for sure. When Rey Rosales made a promise to a fallen friend, there was no hiding forever. Let me know if you'd like me to continue this arc with Kane trying to cover his tracks, perhaps making desperate moves, even against Rey, or Rey confronting Sharon, Nick, or someone else tied to the conspiracy. The story can go darker or more suspenseful from here.